Hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to those of you joining us from the US, and good afternoon to everyone in Europe. Welcome to our session. This is Aura and Vault platform. We're really delighted to take part in the ECI Impact 2020 program, and thank everyone for coming to this fireside chat with Damien, Atkins, and myself, Tori Reichman. Hey, Damien.
Hey, Tori, how are you?
I'm great today. How are you?
Living the dream. You know, somebody has
it.
to, might as well be me.
It always makes me happy to hear when people are living the dream. It's really the way to go.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining. So I think you know this, but I'll tell everyone who's attending today. But we're going to spend the next chunk of time talking about some of the fundamental aspects of a speak up culture in the modern workplace, which Aura absolutely is. We'll talk about what that means, why we think it's important, and then together we'll share some practical steps that folks listening that you guys can take to create or probably ideally progress the speak up culture within your organization. So that's the topic for today. Easy option right now. If anyone's not hoping to hear that, please feel free to excuse yourself. We won't be offended. But for everyone else, we'll try to make this as engaging and interesting and valuable for you as we possibly can. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and join us in this conversation. So I think what I want to first start the context with is addressing why we think this is an important topic to discuss. And when I say we, I mean the fact that Damien, on behalf of Aura, have taken time out of their day to come in and talk about this topic with Vault Platform as part of ECI's Impact Conference. So you may or may not know this, but just at the end of last year, Vault Platform carried out a piece of research. It's called the Trust Gap, and perhaps you've already downloaded a copy of it, or you'd be able to after the session. But in the research, I think there's some really useful context that I'll share now. So just to give you a sense of scale, one of the things that we identified through this research is actually that almost half of office workers, so actually just about half in the UK and just over half in the US of those folks that we surveyed, told us that they personally experienced some form of misconduct in the workplace in their working lives. So that covered the entire company demographic. It was a study of thousands of employees who are office workers. And what it showed us is that there is a real systemic and pervasive issue when it comes to misconduct in the workplace. Something else that we identified that we'll talk about a little bit more later, but I just want to kind of highlight to underline why we're having this conversation is not just that people have experienced misconduct, but actually takes a massive toll on them at a very human and personal level. It also has a toll on the business and real business implications when people experience misconduct. And actually we were able to, as part of our research, we were able to make some extrapolations to the impact that it has on the economy based on what happens to people's performance, what happens to companies that need to go out and manage the attrition as a result of it, et cetera. So I just wanted to give that as a little bit of background. I also kind of want to talk about something that I think is becoming more acknowledged, but worth mentioning right now. So I think certainly from what I've seen, and I think, Damien will have a similar experience and probably those who are participating in this conference, but employees for sure have high expectations on their employers. I could leave it at that, but specifically when it comes to, so not just from a financial perspective, not just from like a career perspective, but actually specifically to create a safe working environment where companies can offer, so ideally offer a safe working environment, but if and when people experience misconduct, and we know that they are, that the employer, that as an employer, we provide them with a safe, secure, and direct channel to be able to speak up about their experiences. And I think, when I entered this industry, which was reasonably recent in the scheme of things, only 3.5 years, but I know Damien, based on your smile, you've been seeing it for a while. I think the expectation that employees had on employers to look after them existed, but certainly in the last 3 years, the expectation employees have on their employer has skyrocketed in terms of how far the employer will go to help protect the employee, how far it will go to help encourage the employee to be able to speak up. So last kind of context setting before I go ahead and actually let Damien have something to say, is just, one of the things that we discussed in our research or uncovered in our research was that, and this goes to employees wanting a secure and safe way to speak up. We asked them and we learned that an average of 76% of the folks that we spoke to believed that if they had a mechanism that helped anonymize their identity, that was app-based, they would feel more confident reporting and escalating their concerns about misconduct that they experience in the workplace. And they feel like that would go a long way to the employer actually providing a safe and secure working environment. So I'm going to pause now. I'm going to welcome Damien, who's had to listen to me talk for the last 5 minutes. But Damien, welcome. Please come along and introduce yourself and about your experience, your background, why you decided to come and join us today.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. Thank you for having me here. I am Damien Atkins. I'm the General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer of Aura. We are an intelligence safety consumer cybersecurity company. Most of the threats now, particularly people working from home, people's lives are now digital, whether it's laptop, phone, iPad, our lives are now digital. And a lot of the cybersecurity issues now are more concerned with enterprises and businesses, but the consumer has been left out. So hence, that's the rationale for Aura. I'm here today because I really believe in the mission of Vault. I believe that Vault is on the right track in terms of, we are now in the 21st century and we need 21st century tools to address kind of the trust gap that has emerged in between employees and employers and, the cultural issues that arise from that. This has probably been a trend for the last maybe 5 to 10 years, but I think the company's tools and ability to manage those things has not evolved. And I think, the Vault solution is the perfect one for that. For so long, the ability for employees to raise their hand has either been through a phone call or an email or, something like that, as opposed to, again, we all live our lives through phones, we live our lives through laptops and iPads. So you need to have the tech to match the culture. And that's why I'm a firm believer in Vault's products and mission.
Thanks, Damien. I love a plug for Vault anytime. But I think, what's super interesting, maybe even before I introduce myself, but why it would be great to share with everyone why at Aura you feel like, whether it's the business, whether it's the objectives, whether it's the culture of the people, without even the audience knowing too much about Vault just yet, but why do you think there's the synergy and that this is kind of going to help you with your objectives?
Because one, we are a technology company and the employee base are, for the most part, have been in tech and grown up in tech. And they're used to using the modern day tools to communicate, whether it's Slack, email, apps, or anything else. And I think as we're looking about it, or in terms of our mission is to make the online world safe for everyone, we have the same mission internally. We preach safety to kids, we preach safety to consumers online, and we got to practice what we preach inside the walls of the company. So that's first. I think the second is, like most folks now, we're a globally distributed workforce, and we have to find some way to still create that culture and those bonds of trust amongst employees, even though we might not see each other face to face. So, that's why I joined Aura. One, because I do believe that the consumers have been left out in terms of the discussions of privacy or cybersecurity and those things. It's all been focused on companies, not the little person. You get your information stolen, who's going to help you? No one. There's multiple places to get pieces of that offering, but not one place. And I think the second thing is the mission of Aura is something that, having experienced identity theft and whatnot myself and others, it is, can I pause for 1 second? Our mission, like I said, is to make the internet a safer place for consumers and particularly families. We have the same mission. We have to create that culture to make it safe for our employees to speak up if they see something that's not right. And I would say, quite frankly, in addition to the mission, I would say that my CEO, Hari Ravichandran, he really believes in this fervently. I mean, he is probably the loudest voice amongst folks on the executive team and sets the correct tone at the top. So when I was looking for opportunities, he really impressed me with his commitment, both to kind of public safety from an online perspective, but also really committed to setting the right tone with an employee base.
Thank you. I love it, and we'll come back to his tone from the top, because I actually think that's something that people will be really interested in hearing about. I'm curious to ask you to share a little bit more about that. I'll quickly introduce myself for those who don't know me, and a little bit about, well, I'm guessing most people don't know me, unless you've attended one of my sessions before. But like I said before, I'm Tori Reichman. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Vault Platform. It's my job at Vault to ensure that we delight our customers from the outset of their relationship at Vault, and we make sure that we deliver exceptional value and that our customers are getting return on their investment from their partnership with us. So that's my scope of responsibility. Now, for those who may not know Vault Platform, so quick introduction, Vault Platform has a very simple mission, which is to change the world of work by giving companies and employees a safe place to record, report, and resolve misconduct. Our approach is that this should be in a very natural, authentic, human way, that your data, your privacy is maintained, information is kept confidentially or anonymously, and everything is managed centrally. It's streamlined. The appropriate checks and balances are placed across the platform so that employees can feel really safe, secure, and empowered to speak up to their businesses directly. We are incredibly passionate about workplace culture. We believe that every organization that adopts Vault can and will become safer and healthier on their journey, that it helps you deliver a more equal and diverse place of work as a result. In terms of products, so we take an app-based approach. It's not our only approach, but we have an app-based approach that helps businesses transform the way workplace misconduct is reported and resolved. Specifically, like Damien said, because people are so on their mobile devices, it puts the point of speak up right at people's fingertips, where they're used to spending the majority of their time in a very natural and authentic way, so that they can actually help the business identify any issues or risks in their programs earlier on than they otherwise would be able to, because people actually use the technology as a forum to be able to speak up. So a little bit about Vault. We have a booth. Feel free to go and check us out. Happy to talk to you one-on-one about it. But now what everyone joined for, which is the chat part of our conversation. So Damien, do you mind if I ask the first question, which I think will flow quite nicely into what you mentioned, which is really, I'm familiar with your career and the organizations that you've worked at and the ethos that you bring to the organizations that you're in. What would you say from your experience are some of the key ingredients of building, maintaining, scaling a positive speak up culture, whether that is on the side of whistleblowing or general speak up about misconduct that's taking place in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's really the first thing. It starts with tone at the top. If your CEO in particular is not the loudest voice or the most frequently heard voice with respect to speak up, do the right thing, ethics and compliance, winning the right way, operating the right way, you're going to be a step behind. I think the second thing would be you really got to every organization that I've been in, whether it's been, small startups or large companies, there are always kind of known kind of bad apples. Yeah, maybe not someone who's like a malicious actor, but just bad apples, people who are either bad for the culture or who are problem actors. But oftentimes, companies don't necessarily have the wherewithal to necessarily weed them out because the person's a great performer or this. People are always great at rationalizing our decisions. But I think without that ability, one, with the tone of the top, someone at the tone of the top really setting the tone and then acting on that and demonstrating that, in addition to saying things, we actually, put our money where our mouth is. Because, companies and employees, particularly nowadays, are very, very media savvy. And they kind of see through, okay, this person's saying this, the company has this town hall, they talked about this, they have all this messaging, but then, person X is still here or person Y is still here. So you have to have some sense of integrity from the top all the way down through to your actions. So I think those are the top two. And I think, there are other things that are important, but I think maybe perhaps less important. I think one is you got to have the right processes and procedures. And those procedures have to match and really fit within the culture. And I think the other thing is confidentiality. I mean, too often, the numbers of organizations I've been in, something happens in a particular org, it's supposed to be confidential, and then you just wait 3 days. Next thing you know, you're hearing things. So that's another way that companies will lose trust. But I think the key thing is tone at the top. You've got to have the right processes, and you've got to take action to weed those folks out.
Can I ask you a follow-up question on that? Specifically tone from the top. So do you have any advice you would share to, folks on the executive team or folks who are in roles of influence where maybe the tone at the top has the right intention, but isn't really there yet, or the business, has stated that they want to move in a certain direction? Do you have any advice from your experience on how people can be effective influencers?
Yeah, I think the first one is, particularly if it's your CEO or any other member of a leadership team, to always dedicate maybe the last 15 seconds or 30 seconds of any kind of formal presentation and have kind of an ethics moment or a ethics session where you either time out to thank so-and-so who did the right thing on respect to that, or because we do that for performance. We give incentives, we praise people for great behavior or great results from a financial or operational standpoint, but I would do the same thing for folks who do the right thing from an ethical or cultural standpoint as well. I think the best companies, at least the ones that I've worked with who do that, has a tremendous impact downstream and it cascades throughout the organization. And the second is more of incentives. I think that, and then somewhat similar to the first point, if you reward people who do the right thing, and you don't necessarily have to publicize it, but I've been in situations where you have kind of whistleblowers and, they report something, they save the company a lot of money, whether there's kind of embezzlement or other else going on. And, just a pat on the back isn't really enough. You oftentimes, and this was somewhat of controversial, but you have to actually reward people because word does spread. And again, it's actions speak louder than words. And if this person, reported something, it resolved itself, helped the company, and you actually tangibly reward them, not just with praise, but like whether it's financial or otherwise. I think that's kind of another way to do it.
Those are two great pieces, actually. I love the idea of an ethics moment at the end of a session, right?
It's tremendously powerful. Yeah, manufacturing companies do this a lot, where they have a safety moment at the beginning or end of every meeting. And I think, well, some companies, we're not in a manufacturing moment, but if you have a quick ethics moment or a moment of gratitude, anything, but I think it helps focus over time.
I think that's a great nugget, actually, and something I would love to start introducing on my team and even on joint projects. I think it's a great way to recognize and really bring to life what we talk about, and then it starts to like influence it all the way through. It's
That's right.
Thank you. Shall I ask you another? Do you want to ask me
something?
Something?
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So you've been at Aura now for how long, remind me?
About 6 months, 7 months.
Okay. So in the 6 or 7 months, will you share some of the ethics, compliance, risks, but some of the initiatives that you've introduced since coming along? What have you been able to kind of build on that was already there And then what have you been able to introduce since joining?
Yeah, the first thing was really kind of hiring a superstar ethics and compliance person. So I hired Ling Lee to kind of take over and manage that. So that was win number 1 through 5.
Awesome.
I think the second thing really is, hitting the refresh button and refresh button and everything that we had. I think we had a good program. We didn't have the right necessarily tools or processes for that. So I was kind of discussing with the CEO and Ling and others. We're looking for the right tools to upgrade. And this is kind of this is how we found Vault, really. I mean, I'd love to, Vault in many ways fit kind of the model of, we have a distributed workforce geographically. We have a tech savvy workforce. We have a workforce that lives on this 24/7, 24/7. So it really, made really, really fit. And I found that the other thing is it is, Aura. It's great to be able to build something from the ground up, and that we had to start the process, and we're getting the process to rebuild and really strengthen the amount of trust that we have amongst the team members, because the company really got off the ground just before the pandemic, and then it hit the pandemic. And so and most of the people, if you look at the employee base, the vast majority, a lot of folks have been there a year or less.
Okay.
So how are you and then there's another group that's probably been there 5 to 10 years, because it's grown through acquisition in many ways. So
yeah,
how do you knit together the various cultures and create a one culture and then build trust kind of as the foundation through that? I mean, you probably have experience with a lot of startups and whatnot at Vault. I mean, so how do you, in your experience, has Vault helped or?
Yeah. So I would say yes, definitely. But I think why it helps is because where I see it be successful is when the business really wants to build that trust with employees, really wants to create this speak up culture where, regardless of really where you fit in the demographic, you trust I'll take a step back. One of the key data points that I learned from speaking to a leading whistleblowing attorney is specifically that folks who end up taking their whistleblowing concern to the SEC have actually tried to report internally 5 to 6 times before going to the SEC, right? Like, so that alone is a reason that Vault exists, because people who work in organizations genuinely want to do the right thing for the organization, right? Like, I appreciate it's a generalization, but it is. And people have chosen to work at a company because usually they believe in the mission, they believe in the vision. There's, their peers have joined that organization. There's something that attracts you to the organization that you choose to work at. And so you're kind of predisposed to wanting to believe in the organization, to trust it, and to believe that it will do the right thing. And so what you have are people who really do want to, everyone accepts that when you've got a business of 5,000, 10,000, 50,000, not everyone there is going to be a perfect human, but by and large, the majority are. And what you want as a business is to empower those people to be your eyes and ears on the ground and be able to spot things and surface concerns so that you as a business can get your arms around them. You can proactively manage them. Ideally, proactively is the space that you want to be in. And why I think Vault is successful with our partners is because we enable your employees to speak up directly to you. It's very clear when they do speak up, right? They're able to submit a report and it stays directly within the business, and the business has visibility that the report was submitted in the first place. I think that's, a lot of where the trust gets broken down in the legacy systems is that the employee doesn't know for sure that the report has been received. They're missing that kind of immediate confirmation, and I think we provide that. I also think the business sometimes loses that ability, or historically loses that ability, to communicate directly with the reporter to say, like, we've got your concern within the scope of what we're willing to tell you. we're looking into it, we're doing these things, we may need some more information, and empowering the business to communicate directly with the person who's raising the concern, with that employee who feels so passionately about the business that they're trying to help protect it. We now allow them to have a direct conversation, even if the person wants to be anonymous, because we know that people have a high fear of retaliation. We know that the fear of retaliation, unfortunately, is justified historically. That's a lot of, that isn't the focus of this conversation, but one of the things in the whistleblowing directive that the directive has set out to mitigate against is the high rates of retaliation. And by empowering people to speak up, by enabling them to document their experience, have visibility to when they report, have visibility to the investigation process at a high level, to allow the investigators or the case managers to speak with the reporter directly while they maintain their anonymity, that all seeks to reinforce and build that trust with the person who has spoken up. And actually, I don't think it goes so far as to what you said just before around, taking a moment and giving praise or reflection from, who's done something great from an ethics point of view, but it certainly goes a measure to give positive reinforcement to the person who spoke up and let them know that the business is looking into the concern and is going to do something about it, or has looked into the concern and says, actually, for whatever reason, this isn't substantiated, but thank you for raising it because we want to continue to hear it. So I think from what I've seen, that's one of the things that customers tell us that helps their program continue to evolve and be successful.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, what you basically described is the opportunity and the reason why there's now kind of a trust tech space. The trust tech is something that has been needed for a long time, but it's been in the hands of more established established businesses that have long-term relationships, but there's been no incentive to really, other than like marginal improvements to the technology. It's kind of fallen behind the culture. So hence, companies like this and others that recognize that we need to have a trust test, kind of creating this whole trust tech.
That's a different webinar.
Category, right? No, but having kind of the trust tech category, I think is remarkable, and it's kind of grown up organically. Too often, I mean, there's I've seen the stats, 4 out of 5 young folks have experienced misconduct in the workplace. And I don't think that is something that is necessarily new, but the avenues and the ability for people to report that has changed. Just even now, the one-to-many communication that you have, that ability has transformed even in the last 10 years. And companies are playing catch up. So, the technology outside of the workplace has now advanced to the point where, hey, my boss did X or my supervisor did Y. You know what? I'm going to put it on Twitter.
Yep.
And next thing you know, it goes, there's no company involvement. There's no ability to understand, is this real or is it not? And it's already out there with, some people have 10, 20, 30,000 followers. You never know, right? It's not part of your, and, that's created a lot of problems. Employees now have that ability to really exercise their voice in so many different channels. And if you don't create alternative or equally attractive channels as an enterprise, you will be that company that all of a sudden, it'll be on Nextdoor, or it'll be on Twitter, it'll be in any number of these various forums where people start talking about stuff. And look, we are in a global war for talent. And particularly if you're recruiting, call it, not even millennials now, Gen Z and even beyond, this is how they gather information about your organization, because the information is there. They can go on LinkedIn and they can look you up on Twitter and they can see what's going on. And then they form their whole opinion of the company. So by the time you show up and trying to recruit, your whole brand has been impacted. And this is a way that you, without those tools to kind of match, to give them those alternatives to speak up, you end up losing control of your culture, your brand, and oftentimes it can have a material detriment to your company.
Absolutely. I think, you certainly hit the nail on the head. And some of the reasons that we see that people come and talk to us is that they want to proactively help mitigate against brand reputational issues, which come from, existing employees, just like you said, they're dissatisfied, or they've had a genuine experience, whether genuine or perceived, but they've had an experience, and they will talk about it, and they will talk about it very publicly using very public media. And the reason that they're doing that is because the technology is there and it's so easy for them to use, but also they oftentimes, and from our research we see, they have low confidence that the business is going to actually do something about it, because that message continually gets reinforced from their peers and from seeing those concerns
all the time. I mean, the whole history of why we have a company called Bumble now, right, is a classic example of that, right? I mean, you have people who are contributing, working as hard as they can, and they're experiencing X, Y, and Z, and at some point, if the company doesn't take things seriously, people have choice, particularly in the tech-enabled world. The ability to either tell your story publicly, to go make changes, is remarkably different than it was even when I started practicing.
Yeah.
And the transparency, right? The amount of transparency. I mean, I was reading something recently about some issues at another tech company on ethics and AI, and woman made a couple of complaints about how work misconduct and people were viewed. And again, within she was terminated, and then within like an hour, the entire conversation with her and HR and the incident investigation was posted on Twitter. So you can see. So, and that, the reason why people do that is because they don't have the feeling like there's any trust or ownership. So with the right tools and the right processes, and again, you have to have the right kind of tone of the top and the culture, but particularly if you don't have the right tools to do it, you're going to be behind. I mean, it could happen in any company.
Absolutely. And there is the technology now to be able to provide visibility to the reporter, to keep the reporter engaged in the investigation at the right levels, right? Like, it's not saying, the idea isn't that companies need to go out and completely transform their way of carrying out investigations. I know a lot are, but that's not what's necessary. What goes a long way, what we're saying, what you actually just said, is around the communication and being able to communicate, give people those updates as to what's happening, bring them along the appropriate way along the process, and let them know that that their concern has been heard, right? It's been heard, it's been evaluated, there is a conclusion, and then go on.
No. I was just thinking, it just hit me that, the other side to this is the whole revolution in data and data analysis and usage. I think, the tools in the past, the data and the way it was organized was raw. It was very hard to draw insights or anything else from it. But, again, with the right tools, you can then track patterns and have heat maps. You can trace type of actions by geographic, by location, by office, by time of day, by method. I mean, all of those things. And that is something that, I mean, we haven't even touched, I think we even scratched the surface and the possibilities for that. But having a data-driven compliance program, or a data-driven, culture, is tremendous, right? And again, it all goes to tools, because it's in there and the capabilities are there. And I think, in my view, I mean, I'd love to get your thoughts on, like, how does that kind of impact a company's ability to really drive culture, and are the right tools out there for it?
Yeah, from what we've seen, so I'll give you a bit of an anecdotal case study from one of our customers. So they've got about 10,000 people spread out globally, and they're in the manufacturing space. So actually funny that you mentioned manufacturing before. They're in the manufacturing space, and what they've been able to do from looking at the data is actually identify, first of all, they can identify geographies where they have different types of concerns, so that they can see that concerns in, I'm not going to name territories, but concerns in X territory center on more behavioral types of misconduct, whereas concerns raised in Y territory center more on corporate misconduct. So fraud, theft, loss prevention. And they're able to, so at a first shot, and that's just even from within the dashboard, but they're able to see where they need to direct their interventions differs by geography. And then they can go down into what are within those geographies, what are the departments that are involved? What are the roles that are involved within the geography itself? Which sites are the ones where they're having different types of problems? And then that really has already helped inform, I said the word interventions before, but it's really helped inform the types of interventions that they're working cross-functionally on. So whether it's from a training perspective, whether it's from an ethics perspective, so they roll out, their different dimensions of their ethics training on new frequencies than, just the twice annually overall ethics program rolling out the trainings. They're now doing them in a real-time basis based on the type of behavior that they're seeing in the population. And because they're able to do that, they're catching activity before it snowballs. They're capturing the tone, they're seeing the tone, they're seeing the culture, how it's evolving in that microcosm. They're able to address it and actually prevent it from snowballing or becoming more of a risk to the overall business.
Right.
And their feedback from employees is that it's been so positive because people are having these experiences, they are raising their concerns, and they actually see very quickly that the business is doing something about it. So they recognize, they believe that their voice is being heard. They see that they have an effect on improving the business, that this company, their employees care so passionately about what they're doing that for them to get that positive reinforcement, it's improved the results on their employee engagement surveys, it's improved their attrition, it improves the sentiment around the question, my company, my manager, I trust my company, I trust my manager to do the right thing. So and that's based on the data that companies can see at their fingertips based on what employees are comfortable speaking up about. So we absolutely do see how technology, how access to data real time can make a difference overall for the business.
I really do think kind of the trust tech space is going to revolutionize the relationship between kind of companies and their employees. So again, we've just scratched the surface of it. There are certain trends in the workforce now that are just going to become permanent or even accelerate even further. The hybrid situations, I think in many ways, are going to be a temporary thing. Over time, you're going to have distributed workforces where, where folks are going to be geographically anywhere in the world, but it doesn't change base human behavior, right? You're still going to see the same harassment. And it might be different, as opposed to someone at the water cooler. It might happen on Zoom, and it does happen on Zoom, believe it or not. It still happens. It happens on, various
shocking, but it does.
Shockingly, but it happens on Zoom, believe it or not. It happens on chat apps and whatnot. So I think that, as the trust tech space matures and grows and develops and captures even more and more data, you're going to see kind of more compliance programs and the compliance programs and ethics programs really be much more data driven, much more, I want to say, not necessarily as reactive as it is, but you can even see some anticipatory things when you see the trends happening in certain areas, whether it's X type of misconduct or this type of format. You say, okay, clearly our next training schedule has to be X, or our messaging has to be tailored to X audience. And I guess the next thing would be, oftentimes there is a large gap between, what the professional kind of ethics and compliance staff is able to see and what you see at boards. So as we kind of get in the ESG space, and you focus on the G as well as the S, boards are going to have a much more sense of transparency about what's really going on. It's like look at Activision Blizzard, for example. Things have been going on in that company for a long time. And some of it got to the CEO, some of it didn't. But I can predict now with this trust tech and particularly things like Vault, a lot of that data is going to go directly to the audit committee. There's no, it's going to be very hard to say, I can't do this. We filtered it, we messaged it, we positioned it. No, it's going to be a direct feed. And I think tech's going to enable that and accelerate that transition.
So in my experience, it already has. We have, our dashboards go straight to the audit committee at a number of clients. And it should, right? And I because they're like you described, there's no excuse anymore. The data is accessible, right? Companies can get their hands. It can be real time. It's not reporting to you at the end of the first half of the year, something that happened the end of the prior year. It's what's actually happening right now. I can tell you as of today exactly how many reports that we've had. What are the themes of those reports? What's the location? What are we doing about it? What are the risks? And actually, I think, as we look forward, some things that I'm seeing, but I'm curious to hear what you're seeing, what you're building. For us, a lot of the conversation now is how do we move from this passive, let's report about stuff that has happened, to proactive, what is happening currently to mitigate it, and then future, how do we prevent or really capture concerns at the earliest stages? How do we detect patterns at the earliest stages before they become true risks to the business?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no. So what are you seeing? What do you think?
It's really kind of implementing by design the transparency in the processes and the systems. So, for example, I'll use an example of like Netflix in their board meetings. It's world famous that Netflix will have kind of a board memo that is kind of on a shared platform. The board members just open up, and before the board meeting, people are offering comments and dialogue, and there's links to data and all this. The same thing is going to happen now with kind of E&C reports. It'll be like a living document that people can access at any time, send questions off to the professional team. And that's how you get in front of things. That's how you build trust. You didn't mention the management and the board, but then the board and the company's employees and management. So that is what's being built by design now, because if you don't start from the ground up, it's very hard to do with a lot of legacy systems. It's probably harder to transform something that's been embedded for a very long time to then transform it into something new. It's just the incentives typically are not right, and the data and the programming and the heart and the software stack isn't really malleable enough. But so that's what we're doing here at Aura. I mean, we're kind of hitting the refresh button, starting from the ground up, so that way you kind of have that transparency by design, right, enabled by kind of the trust tech, right? So I think that without that, we'll be back in the same, once a quarter, we'll send you 3 slides, all in PDF. And, everything's been heavily edited out, and rehearsed, and you have your script and whatnot, because that approach has only gotten companies in trouble. It might have worked, call it in the 90s or the 80s, where, email was the new hot thing, and people, the culture, workforce culture was much more of a kind of a standardized, commoditized type model, where now, to be competitive, you need to have a much more transparency is critical. You need to have a lot more mobility, and it has to be tech enabled. So that's what we're doing at Aura, is just starting from the ground up, transparency by design, kind of enabled by trust tech.
I love it. I've got one more question for you before we start to wrap up, but you touched on this. You touched on ESG, and I just want to pick on that because I think it's super important and probably at the top of everyone's mind, who's, well, if not, will be at the top of your mind.
Absolutely.
So what do you think ESG issues are going to factor into concerns or whistleblowing concerns? Do you think they currently do? And do you think that number will increase? So people who identify ESG concerns, do you think people will either start or continue or increase the rates of which they're blowing their whistle on them?
It's going to increase exponentially, I think. You see Disney in Florida, then basically there is you had a CEO who was kind of taking your more traditional approach. I've looked at this, I've done that, and because you're trying to preserve relationships on one hand, but then you have an employee base so concerned about ESG issues, generally quality and otherwise, that they spoke out, and it was like an open revolt, where you have a CEO who's performing admirably from a financial operational standpoint, but then it calls into question his judgment and fitness for the job because employees are upset about the company's stand on a particular issue. So I think that is something that we're going to see considerably more of, because the employees of today want to work in organizations that reflect their values, and when you find the companies don't do that, you have situations like that. You also saw this, I guess it's not at the Gap, but another retail company where you have executives who are speaking out on various social issues.
Mhm.
Try to manage it, and next you know, they're a Twitter they're a Twitter superstar. So
Mhm.
I think that the line between kind of what stays in the company and it's purely company and driving maximizing profit for shareholders is the line between that and what's going on in society, whether it's politics, it's environmental issues, social issues. That line and that wall is really it's crumbled
Yep.
in the last 5 years. So I think you can no longer separate what's inside the company, what's outside the company. There's no such thing. It's all intermixed. Kind of like work-life balance has become kind of this is the work life and this no, it's all kind of mixed up. The same thing true with kind of what's going on outside in the world versus what's going on in the company. So it's going to grow exponentially, I think.
I think the way you position it makes a lot of sense. People, from what I'm seeing, because people are empowered to speak up right? Like that you talked about the commoditization back in the 80s and 90s of staff. It's completely, the paradigm has completely shifted. This is a society where people's voices will be heard. Even two and a half years ago, I was talking about the trend towards activism. Like that's gone. People, and it's not, in my experience, something that constantly, not surprised, but like I'm constantly like, oh, is that it's not just the newest generations into the workforce who feel empowered to speak up, who naturally are empowered to speak up. I'm seeing my generation and the older generations change the way and change the level of confidence that they have in speaking up and speaking. I'm going to quote a line from The West Wing, but speaking truth to power, right? Like
Absolutely.
Business has changed, and people in organizations, whether the tone from the top overtly empowers people to speak up, they will. And I think what you've talked about, what I'm seeing, or on behalf of what we're seeing, is that organizations who want to proactively give their employees a place so that their employees can come and tell them what's happening and build and rebuild and strengthen that trust are the ones who will be in a better position to continue to evolve and transform their cultures, to continue to reinvest in direct their interventions where they need to go to continuously improve and to have a positive impact on the bottom line. And then the ones that don't, the ones that are kind of saying, oh, I don't know if I want to hear all this stuff. They won't hear it directly, but they're going to hear it. They're going to hear it somehow because people, I think what had historically held people back, that confidence or that safety net that held people back from speaking up, I think it's gone. And this just seems to be a case of, can I protect my organization? Can I empower my people to tell me what's happening so I can be proactive about it, rather than miss that opportunity? I don't know. Right. That's my last word on the matter. I don't know what you think.
No, I think that's right. I mean, you have to create an equally attractive space for people to voice their opinions and bring their whole selves into the workplace, because they're already doing it already. It's on TikTok.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
It's on Instagram, right? So so it's just if you don't keep up, you're going to end up losing and suffer things like you see with Activision Blizzard and other companies. So you've got to use the tools, you have to create the culture, you have to do everything to make it equally attractive. Now it's still in many ways it might be too late for a lot of organizations, but if you have to do something, I think having the right tools and then having kind of the right mindset and culture from the top on down will be the differentiators.
Awesome. Well, you're definitely the right culture from the top on down.
We're trying every day.
That's all you can do. That's all you can do is try. Well, it was lovely to chat with you. Thank you.
Likewise. Yeah, thanks, Tori. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thanks everyone for joining. We'll be back in a couple of moments. Open up for any questions, but thank you. Hopefully you're enjoying the conference and you've enjoyed today. And yeah. Cool. Thanks, Damien. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.